He thought she was just another invisible server. When the city's most feared syndicate boss insulted her body in flawless Arabic, assuming she wouldn't understand, he never expected the plus-sized waitress to turn around and call him a coward in his own secret tongue. That one mistake changed everything. The ambient lighting inside the Gilded Lily was designed to make its ultra-wealthy patrons look flawless, casting a warm golden glow over the mahogany tables and crystal chandeliers. Located in the beating heart of Manhattan, the restaurant was a sanctuary for the elite. For Josephine Miller, it was simply a battlefield where the tips paid the rent. Josie was not the typical waitress hired by Albert Henderson, the notoriously strict floor manager. The standard uniform was a tight, unforgiving black dress designed for a specific waif-like body type. Josie, however, was beautifully unapologetically plus-size. She carried her curves with an innate confidence. Her dark hair pinned back in a sharp twist, her lips painted a defiant crimson. Albert had hired her because she possessed something the other servers lacked: absolute, unshakable composure. She could handle Wall Street billionaires and arrogant celebrities without batting an eyelash. But tonight, the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted from opulent to oppressive. At exactly 10 o'clock, the front doors opened, and the usual hum of polite conversation died in the throats of the patrons. Taylor Rossi had arrived. Taylor was a ghost story whispered in the boardrooms and dark alleys of New York. As the head of the Rossi syndicate, his legitimate businesses and real estate were merely a shiny veneer over an empire built on extortion, smuggling, and blood. He was a striking man, tall and broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that screamed old money. His face was a study in cold, sharp angles, his dark eyes scanning the room with the predatory calm of a man who owned everything he looked at. Flanked by 3 heavily built associates, Taylor was escorted immediately to the private alcove in the back, a secluded table shielded by velvet ropes and towering ferns. "Josie," Albert hissed, grabbing her elbow as she passed the bar. His usually ruddy face was pale, a fine sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead. "Table 9, the Rossi party. Do not make eye contact. Do not linger. Pour the wine, take the order, and get out of their breathing space." "It's just another table, Albert," Josie replied calmly, balancing a silver tray with a bottle of a ridiculously expensive Barrow. "It is not just another table," Albert snapped. "That man could buy this building just to burn it down. Be careful." Josie smoothed the front of her apron, took a deep breath, and approached the alcove. As she stepped past the velvet rope, the air grew noticeably colder. Taylor was seated at the head of the table, nursing a tumbler of scotch. His right-hand man Jordan sat to his left, scrolling through a burner phone. "Good evening, gentlemen," Josie said, her voice smooth and professional. "Can I start you off with our chef's tasting menu, or would you prefer to order a la carte?" Taylor didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the low-lit candle in the center of the table. Jordan, however, glanced up, a sneer playing on his lips. As Josie leaned over to pour the BO for Jordan, her hip brushed lightly against the edge of the oversized leather chair. It was a minor, unavoidable contact given the tight spacing of the alcove, but it caused the heavy wineglass to clink sharply against the bottle. A single drop of dark red wine fell, staining the pristine white tablecloth. Jordan clicked his tongue in exaggerated annoyance. Taylor finally raised his eyes. They were obsidian black, entirely devoid of warmth. He looked Josie up and down, his gaze lingering on her full hips and soft waist. With a mixture of aristocratic disdain and raw irritation, without breaking eye contact with Josie, Taylor leaned slightly toward Jordan and spoke. He didn't speak in English. He didn't speak in Italian. He spoke in rapid guttural Arabic, a language he had mastered during his years negotiating illegal arms trades in the Middle East. A language he frequently used in public when he wanted to communicate with his inner circle without the cattle understanding. "Look at this," Taylor murmured in Arabic, his voice a dark, mocking rumble. "She eats more than she serves. A clumsy, heavy cow blocking the walkway. Get her out of my sight before she breaks the furniture." Jordan chuckled a low, cruel sound, preparing to wave Josie away like a bothersome insect. They expected her to bow her head. They expected her to apologize for the spilled drop of wine, completely ignorant of the vicious insult that had just been hurled at her body. They were wrong. Before her father had passed away, he had been a senior civilian contractor for the Department of Defense. Stationed in Cairo and later Beirut, Josie had spent 10 years of her childhood and adolescence immersed in the culture, studying the dialects, and eventually earning a degree in Middle Eastern linguistics. She didn't just understand Arabic. She spoke it with the sharp, street-level fluency of a native. Josie froze. The silver tray in her hand trembled for a fraction of a second before her grip turned to iron. A hot, blinding wave of indignation washed over her, completely overriding Albert's desperate warnings. She slowly set the bottle of Beau down on the table. The heavy thud of the glass against the wood made Jordan jump. Josie squared her shoulders, looking down at Taylor Rossi. The air in the alcove seemed to vacuum itself out. "A real man," Josie said, her Arabic ringing out clear, sharp, and flawlessly pronounced, cutting through the jazz music playing in the background. "Does not need to borrow another language to insult a woman's body. Only a pathetic coward hides behind words he thinks his victim cannot understand." Jordan's jaw dropped so fast it practically unhinged. The burner phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the hardwood floor. Taylor's reaction, however, was entirely different. The bored, aristocratic disdain vanished from his face, replaced by a shock so profound it paralyzed his features. His dark eyes widened, locking onto Josie's fierce, blazing gaze. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. The silence was deafening. The 2 heavily armed guards standing near the ferns instinctively reached inside their jackets, sensing the sudden spike in tension, but Taylor held up a single raised finger, stopping them dead. "You, Taylor," started his voice, a rough whisper, speaking English. "Now if my presence offends you, sir," Josie continued smoothly in English, her tone dripping with ice, "I will gladly have another server take over your table. Enjoy your evening." Without waiting for his dismissal, Josie turned on her heel. She walked out of the alcove, her head held high, her posture immaculate. Behind her, the silence of the Mafia boss was louder than a gunshot. For the next 48 hours, Josie waited for the sky to fall. She jumped every time her apartment buzzer rang. She looked over her shoulder on her walk to the subway. You didn't publicly humiliate the head of the Rossi syndicate and walk away unscathed. But Friday passed, then Saturday, and the streets of Manhattan remained ordinary. By Tuesday evening, Josie had convinced herself she had gotten lucky. Perhaps a man like Taylor Rossi was too arrogant to acknowledge the incident. Perhaps he had bigger problems to deal with than a loudmouthed waitress. She was wrong again. It was 10:30 at night. The restaurant was usually winding down, the final patrons finishing their desserts. Josie was in the back room, tallying up her receipts when the kitchen door swung open violently. Hannah, a fellow waitress, burst in her face, drained of all color. "Josie," Hannah gasped, clutching her chest. "Albert says you need to come out to the floor now. I'm off the clock in 20 minutes. "Hannah, what's wrong?" "The restaurant is empty," Hannah said, her voice shaking. "I mean, it's empty. Some guys in suits came in 10 minutes ago and paid everyone's checks. They told all the customers to leave. They locked the front doors." A cold dread coiled in Josie's stomach. She dropped her pen, untied her apron, and pushed past Hannah into the main dining room. This scene was surreal. The Gilded Lily, normally bustling with life, was completely deserted. The busboys, the bartenders, and the hostesses were gone. The only person standing near the bar was Albert, who looked like he was about to faint, and sitting alone at a table in the exact center of the room was Taylor Rossi. He wasn't flanked by his usual entourage. Jordan was standing by the front door, his arms crossed, locking the deadbolt. Taylor was wearing a tailored black shirt, the top 2 buttons undone, looking entirely too comfortable in the eerily silent restaurant. When he saw Josie, he gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit, Josephine," Taylor said. His voice was a low, commanding baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. Josie stood her ground. "How do you know my name?" "I know a great deal more than your name," Taylor replied, leaning back in his chair. "Sit. I am not accustomed to repeating myself, and I'm not accustomed to being held hostage at my place of work." Josie shot back, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. She slowly walked over, pulling out the chair and sitting opposite him. She kept her back straight, refusing to shrink under his intense, calculating gaze. Up close, he was even more intimidating. There was a dangerous magnetism to him, a raw, coiled energy thaw. T made the air between them feel electric. He studied her face, his dark eyes tracing the curve of her cheek, the defiant set of her jaw. "You have courage, Josephine," Taylor finally said. "Stupid, reckless courage. Do you know what usually happens to people who call me a coward in front of my men?" "I assume they end up at the bottom of the Hudson," Josie replied flatly. "If you're here to kill me, Mr. Rossi doing it in a restaurant with security cameras seems rather messy for a man of your reputation." Taylor let out a low, rough laugh that startled her. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a sound of genuine amusement. "I have no intention of harming you," Taylor said, leaning forward, the amusement fading into a sharp, businesslike intensity. "In fact, I am here to offer you a job." Josie stared at him, sure she had misheard. "A job? You cleared out a 5-star restaurant to offer a waitress a job?" "I don't need a waitress," Taylor said softly. "I need a translator and a negotiator." He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder, tossing it onto the table. It slid to a stop inches from Josie's hands. "My organization is expanding," Taylor explained, his voice dropping an octave. "We are currently negotiating a highly sensitive, highly lucrative supply route with a faction based out of Alexandria. They are proud, traditional, and deeply paranoid. My usual translators are inadequate. They speak the language, but they don't understand the nuance. They don't grasp the cultural respect required to seal the deal." "And you think I do?" Josie asked, bewildered. "Your accent the other night," Taylor murmured, leaning closer. "It wasn't textbook. It was authentic." "You lived in the Middle East, Beirut and Cairo, for 10 years. Taylor nodded slowly. "Perfect. I need you to accompany me to a meeting this Friday. You will translate for me. You will read the room. You will tell me when they are lying. And you will ensure my words are delivered with the exact level of respect and underlying threat that I intend. You are out of your mind." Josie scoffed, pushing her chair back. "I'm a civilian. I serve overpriced pasta to rich snobs. I am not getting involved in mafia politics. Hire a professional." "I cannot use a professional." Taylor countered, his eyes hardening. "Anyone known in my circles is a liability. I need a ghost. Someone completely unconnected to my world. Someone they won't suspect of being anything more than a pretty hired assistant." He paused, letting his eyes drag over her curves again, but this time there was no disdain. There was an unsettling heat. "Though you are far more than that, aren't you?" Josie stood up. "My answer is no. I'm leaving." "Sit down, Josephine," Taylor said. The gentle amusement was gone. It was a direct, terrifying order. Josie froze, but didn't sit. "You said you weren't going to hurt me." "I am not going to hurt you," Taylor agreed, tapping a long finger against the manila folder. "But I cannot speak for what the Irish syndicate will do to your younger brother." The blood drained from Josie's face. She stared at the folder, a sick feeling rising in her throat. "Liam," Taylor said, saying her brother's name like a judge passing a sentence. 22 years old? A crippling addiction to underground poker. He currently owes $50,000 to a crew run by a man named Sullivan, a man who is notoriously impatient. Liam missed his payment yesterday. Sullivan's men are currently looking for him to break his legs. After that, they will likely come looking for you, his only living relative, to collect the rest." Josie grabbed the folder and flipped it open. Inside were photographs of her brother walking out of a dingy basement club in Queens, copies of betting slips, and a detailed ledger of his debts. Her hands shook violently. She had known Liam was in trouble. He had been asking to borrow money for weeks, but she had no idea the hole was this deep. "You bastard, Josie," whispered her voice cracking. "Did you set him up?" "I don't play games with children," Taylor replied coldly. "His debts are his own. I simply have good informants, but I can make this problem disappear." Taylor stood up slowly. He was a foot taller than her, and his proximity was overwhelming. He smelled of cedarwood, expensive tobacco, and power. "Help me close this deal with the Alexandrians on Friday," Taylor said, his voice dropping to a hypnotic murmur. Act as my voice. Ensure I am not cheated. Do this one thing for me, and I will wipe Liam's debt clean. I will pay Sullivan off myself. Your brother lives, and you walk away free." Josie looked up into Taylor's dark, fathomless eyes. She hated him in that moment. She hated his arrogance, his power, and the way he had effortlessly backed her into a corner. But as she thought of Liam, her foolish, desperate brother, she knew she had no choice. "If I do this," Josie said, her voice shaking slightly, but her chin raised in defiance. "If I do this, you'd never speak to me again. You never come near my brother, and you never set foot in this restaurant again." Taylor stared down at her, a strange, complex emotion flickering across his stoic features. He reached out his warm, calloused fingers, gently brushing against her jawline. Josie flinched, but he didn't pull away immediately. "We have a deal, Josephine," Taylor whispered. The trap was sprung. Josie had just traded a life of serving wine for a seat at the devil's table, completely unaware that the Mafia boss had no intention of ever letting her walk away. The black armored SUV cut through the rain-soaked streets of the Brooklyn Navy Yards, the heavy tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Josie sat rigid in the back seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a tailored, midnight blue pantsuit, a garment provided by Taylor's personal tailor just hours before. It was meant to act as a kind of psychological armor, but beneath the expensive, perfectly fitted fabric, she felt entirely exposed. Taylor sat beside her, a silent, imposing shadow in the dim interior. The silence stretching between them was suffocating. She glanced at him, noting the hard, unforgiving lines of his jaw and the relaxed, almost bored way. He held a heavy, suppressed pistol resting on his knee. He was a man going to a routine business meeting. She was a woman, stepping blindly into the abyss. "Are you afraid, Josephine?" he asked suddenly, his voice a low rumble over the sound of the engine, though he did not turn his head to look at her. "I am terrified," she admitted honestly, her voice trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to control it. "Good fear keeps you sharp." "It keeps you alive," Taylor replied, finally turning his dark eyes toward her. "Just remember the plan we discussed. Translate exactly what Tariq says to me word for word. But more importantly, listen for what he does not say. Listen for the hesitation, the shift in tone. You are my radar tonight." The SUV rolled to a heavy stop outside a desolate, sprawling shipping warehouse. The rain hammered against the roof in a relentless rhythm. It was time. The interior of the warehouse was cavernous and damp, smelling strongly of saltwater rust and old dried blood. A single glaring halogen lamp hung from the high ceiling, casting harsh shadows and illuminating a large wooden crate that served as a makeshift negotiation table in the center of the room. Standing on the far side of the light were 5 men. The leader, Tar, was a slender, elegant man with slicked-back silver hair and eyes like shattered glass. Taylor stepped confidently into the light, gesturing subtly for Josie to stand slightly behind his right shoulder. Jordan and 2 other heavily armed guards fanned out, securing the perimeter. Tariq smiled, a thin, venomous expression that didn't reach his eyes, and began speaking in rapid, formal Arabic. "Welcome, Mr. Rossi. It is a profound honor to finally conduct our mutual business face-to-face in this city," Tariq said, spreading his hands in a gesture of faux hospitality. Josie translated seamlessly. Keeping her voice steady and entirely devoid of emotion, Taylor replied in English, dictating his strict terms for the illegal weapons shipment, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. The back and forth was tedious, a delicate, dangerous dance of power, greed, and posturing. For 20 agonizing minutes, the negotiation proceeded exactly as Taylor had anticipated. Then the atmosphere in the room shifted. Tariq's tone dropped, becoming softer, more rhythmic, almost musical. He spoke of mutual respect, shared enemies, and long-term lucrative profits. But Josie, listening with the highly trained ear of a linguistic expert, caught the sudden, subtle change. He switched rapidly from the formal, educated dialect he had been using all evening to a highly specific regional, heavily coded slang, utilized exclusively by the coastal smugglers of Alexandria. He wasn't speaking to Taylor anymore. He was giving an execution order to his hidden men. "The shipment is fully ready," Tariq said smoothly, his eyes locking onto Taylor's. "We can finalize the financial transfer tonight, but we require a gesture of good faith from your side." But the slang, the hidden context woven into the vowels, meant something entirely different. Jose's blood ran cold. Her heart slammed violently against her ribs. She leaned in close to Taylor's ear, her breath hitching. "He just told his men upon the catwalk to lock the heavy doors," Josie whispered rapidly, panic lacing her tone. "It is an ambush, Taylor. They do not have the shipment at all. They are here to execute you and take over the Eastern Territory." Taylor did not flinch. He did not look up at the dark, menacing shadows above them. His expression remained utterly impassive, a mask of carved stone. "Tell Tar," Taylor said in English, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that echoed in the quiet warehouse, "that I am fresh out of good faith." Before Josie could even open her mouth to translate the warning, the entire warehouse exploded into deafening chaos. Taylor moved with terrifying predatory speed. He grabbed Josie firmly by the waist, practically throwing her behind a massive solid steel shipping container. Just as the first deadly barrage of automatic bullets rained down from the hidden catwalk overhead, the deafening roar of gunfire filled the cavernous space, echoing endlessly. Cement dust, shattered glass, and blinding sparks showered down upon them. Josie hit the cold concrete floor hard, covering her ears and pressing her face against her knees, trembling violently as the world tore itself apart. Taylor immediately returned fire, his face a mask of cold, calculated fury. He wasn't a polished businessman anymore. He was a ruthless warlord defending his life and his empire. "Stay down." Taylor roared over the sheer cacophony of shattering metal and ricocheting bullets. The warehouse had instantly become a deadly battlefield. Jordan and the Rossi guards were desperately returning fire, trying to pin the Alexandrian snipers behind the rusty steel support beams. Tariq had vanished completely into the shadows, his elegant demeanor replaced by a cowardly, desperate retreat into the darkness. Josie pressed her back against the cold, unyielding metal of the shipping container, her breath coming in rapid, ragged gasps. She had never been anywhere near a gunfight before. The harsh reality of it was absolutely terrifying. A brutal sensory overload of explosive noise, acrid smoke, and the metallic temps of blood hanging heavily in the air. A stray bullet sparked dangerously off the corner of their makeshift barricade, sending a sharp shower of hot metal fragments raining over Jose's shoulder. She cried out in sudden pain, clutching her arm tightly. Taylor immediately dropped heavily to one knee beside her, his dark eyes wide with sudden, uncharacteristic alarm. "Are you hit?" he demanded, grabbing her shoulder with frantic urgency. "No," she gasped out, tears stinging her eyes. "Just sparks. I'm okay." His grip on her was iron-strong, yet strangely, incredibly protective. In the very midst of the deadly chaos, surrounded by enemies wanting his head, he was completely single-mindedly focused on her survival. Jordan Taylor barked sharply into a small encrypted radio clipped to his collar, suppressing fire on the east wall immediately. "We are moving to the loading bay exit now." He turned back to Josie, his face mere inches from hers. The heavy scent of gunpowder and his rich cedarwood cologne enveloped her senses completely. "Listen to me, Josephine. When I give the signal, you run directly to the exit. Do not stop for anything. Do not look back. I will cover you." "I can't outrun bullets," she cried, sheer panic, threatening to consume her mind entirely. "You won't have to," he promised, his voice acting as an unbreakable anchor in the violent storm. "I will not let them touch you. Do you trust me?" It was a completely absurd question to ask. He was a mafia boss, a violent criminal, a man who had ruthlessly blackmailed her into participating in this nightmare. Yet looking deep into his eyes, she saw an absolute, unwavering resolve. He was putting his own life directly on the line to ensure she survived his dangerous mistake. Josie swallowed hard, nodded her head, and prepared to run. "Go!" Taylor shouted loudly. He stepped out boldly from behind cover, unleashing a relentless, deafening barrage of fire toward the catwalk. Josie ran. She pushed her legs as hard as she possibly could, her expensive dress shoes slipping slightly on the wet concrete floor. The exit was a glowing rectangle of pale moonlight 50 yards away. The roar of gunfire was deafening, but miraculously nothing touched her. Taylor's covering fire was suppressing the enemy completely. She burst through the heavy loading bay doors, plunging into the freezing rain-swept night. A moment later, Taylor emerged from the darkness, grabbing her arm tightly and pulling her toward a secondary extraction vehicle hidden deep in an alleyway. They threw themselves into the back of the armored sedan, and the car tore away into the night. The safe house was a lavish, heavily fortified penthouse, overlooking the glittering skyline of Manhattan. A stark contrast to the bloody warehouse they had just escaped. Josie sat curled on a velvet sofa, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, staring blankly into a roaring fireplace. Taylor stood by the massive floor-toseling window, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. He had shed his ruined suit jacket, his white shirt stained with dirt and soot, but he looked entirely unbothered by the night's violent events. "You saved my life tonight, Josephine," Taylor said quietly, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the room. "If you hadn't caught that dialect shift, I would be lying dead on that warehouse floor right now." Jerick played a very clever game, but he underestimated the waitress. Josie looked up at him, her exhaustion wearing with her lingering anger. "I did what I had to do to survive, Taylor. I held up my end of our bargain. Now it is time for you to hold up yours." Taylor turned to face her, his expression unreadable. He slowly walked over to a polished mahogany desk, picked up a thick envelope, tossed it gently onto the coffee table in front of her. "Liam's debts are fully paid," Taylor stated firmly. "Sullivan will never look in his direction again. Your brother is completely free, and as promised, so are you." Josie stared at the envelope, a profound wave of relief washing over her. The nightmare was finally over. She could go back to her quiet, ordinary life. She could go back to being an invisible server, pouring wine for arrogant billionaires. But as she looked at Taylor standing there bathed in the firelight, she realized something terrifying. The thought of walking out that door and never seeing him again felt strangely hollow. She stood up, letting the blanket fall from her shoulders, and picked up the envelope. "Thank you," she said softly. She turned to walk toward the door, her heart aching with a bizarre, confusing sorrow. But before she could take 3 steps, Taylor moved. In a blur of motion, he was standing directly in front of her, blocking her path, his dark eyes burning with an intense, consuming fire. "I said you were free to go," Taylor murmured, his voice dropping to a rough, hypnotic whisper as he stepped closer. "But I never said I would let you walk away." Josie's breath hitched in her throat. "We had a deal, Taylor." "I am a selfish, ruthless man, Josephine," he confessed, reaching out to gently trace the soft curve of her cheek. "I have built an empire on blood and fear. But tonight, I found something far more valuable than territory or weapons. I found a queen who can stand by my side in the absolute darkest of storms. You are brilliant, fierce, and incredibly beautiful. I cannot let you go back to a life that does not deserve you. You belong in my world now," he declared softly, leaning down until his lips were mere fractions of an inch from hers. "Stay with me. Rule the city with me. Let me give you everything you have ever been denied." Josie looked up into the eyes of the most dangerous man in New York. A man who had insulted her, threatened her, and ultimately saved her. The sensible, safe part of her brain screamed to run. But the fierce, untamed part of her heart, the part that had confidently called a Mafia boss a coward in Arabic, leaned forward. She closed the final distance between them, capturing his lips in a fiery, desperate kiss that sealed her fate forever. The plus-sized waitress was gone. The queen of the Rossi syndicate had officially arrived. Did you love this thrilling Mafia romance? If Josie's fierce bravery and Taylor's dark, protective energy kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow romance readers and subscribe to the channel for more intense, dramatic, and twist-filled audio stories uploaded every single week. Leave a comment below telling us what you think Taylor will do.